Welcome back, listeners, to Sandman Stories Presents, a folklore podcast where I read you to sleep or until the next story. I'm your host, Dustin. Today we are back in the book of Azorean folklore, recorded by Elsie Spicer Eells. Today we're going to learn about a little Tom Thumb type of boy who helps his father become rich. And in the second story, we have a touch of the Little Mermaid mixed with Urashimotaro visiting the ocean world. Okay, let's begin. Manoel Littlebean, the story of how he helped his father. Long ago there lived a man and his wife who had no children. "I wish I had a little boy," said the man. "I'd like a son of my own, even if he were no larger than a little bean," said the woman. Time passed and a son was born to this worthy couple. He was no larger than a little bean, and as the years went by, he never grew any bigger. His name was Manoel Littlebean. He caused his mother endless trouble by constantly getting lost. Sometimes she'd nearly step on him. Other times he'd fall into the food, and she would almost swallow him. One day his mother couldn't find him. "Manoel Littlebean, Manoel Littlebean," she called. There was no answer. She went outside the house and called his name anxiously. There was no reply. She asked all the neighbors if they had seen their child, but there was nobody who had noticed him that day. His poor mother was nearly wild with anxiety. "I'm afraid I'll never see the dear child again," she mourned. "I am sure I've either stepped on him or swallowed him." "You've never stepped on him or swallowed him yet," comforted her husband. However, he added anxiously, "I can't see what has become of my Manoel." The truth of the matter was that Manoel Littlebean had been swallowed by the goat. He was a most active youngster in spite of his small size, and he caused the goat a terrible attack of indigestion. The goat did not know what was the matter, and he tore around so wildly and caused so much destruction that his master decided to kill him. "I simply can't be bothered with that goat any longer," he said. "I have quite enough to worry about already with Manoel Littlebean lost, and my poor wife nearly sick with anxiety because of it." He never dreamed that it was his son who was making the goat go so wild with misery. When the goat was dead, he threw it out into the street. That night, a wolf came and ate the goat. He swallowed the goat's stomach so greedily that Manoel Littlebean had no time to escape. However, he jumped about just as actively inside the wolf as he had done with the goat who had swallowed him. The wolf was just as uncomfortable as the goat had been. "What is the matter with me?" thought the wolf. "Never in my life have I had such a stomachache. I believe I'm going to die." He ran away into the forest and crept into a cave to await his end. Inside the cave was a robber's den. 3 robbers were there counting over the gold they had just brought back. When they saw the wolf, they were so frightened that they dropped their bags of gold and ran away as fast as they could, leaving everything behind them. Manoel Littlebean guessed that he was making the wolf sick. "If I can only make him so ill that he will spit me up," said Manoel to himself as he jumped about his liveliest. That is exactly what happened. The wolf spit Manoel Littlebean out. He was decidedly dirty and unattractive, but he didn't mind in the least. He saw the quantities of gold in the robber's cave and his eyes shone. "If I can only find my way home and tell my father about it, he will become a rich man," he cried. It was a long distance home, and several times he thought he had lost his way. Finally, however, he saw his own mother's light in the window, and he ran toward it as fast as he could run. "Manoel Littlebean, what have you been doing?" cried his mother when she saw him. "Where did you get so dirty? Come, let me give you a bath first thing." "Never mind about the bath, mother," said Manoel. "I have more important things to attend to. Where is father?" His mother called her husband, and they both forgot how dirty the child was when they heard his story. "Let us hurry to the robber's cave, father," he said. "We must get there before they return." "What about the wolf?" asked his mother anxiously. Manoel Littlebean laughed. "The wolf doesn't have a stomachache now," he said. "He went home a long time ago." They went to the robber's cave and brought home the huge sacks full of gold. It was enough to make them live like princes for a lifetime. "I have the best and cleverest son in the world," said the father. "Never in the world has there been a son who was such a joy and comfort to his parents," said his mother. Manoel Littlebean was treated by everyone as politely as if he had been big. The end. Okay, and story number 2, The Necklace of Pearls, the story of a water nymph and an island lad. In a tiny cottage on the steep rocky hillside of one of the islands of the Azores, there lived a poor woman and her only son, whose name was Francisco. Every day the boy went fishing in his little boat, and every night he brought home fish for his mother to cook for their evening meal and to carry into the market to sell. In this way they lived very comfortably, and they loved each other so dearly that they were as happy can be. Francisco, with his sun-kissed skin, green eyes, and thatch of black curly hair, was the handsomest boy in the whole parish, and by the time he was 20 years old, there were many a rich man's daughter who smiled upon him. However, the lad thought only of his fishing boat and his mother, and did not notice the smiles. One night the moon was so bright that Francisco could not sleep. He awakened his mother, who was dozing comfortably in her bed. "I'm going fishing, mother dear," he said as he kissed her. "The moonlight is calling me." His mother started up from her bed in terror and amazement. "Why, my boy, do you do such a thing as this?" she asked. "You have never been fishing in the night before. Some evil will surely befall you." "Don't worry about me, dear mother," replied Francisco, laughing at her fears. "I know how to take care of myself. It is as light as day. Think of how many fish I'll bring back for you to sell in the market tomorrow." His mother shook her head anxiously, but with another loving kiss, the lad ran out into the bright moonlight. He quickly launched his little fishing boat and was soon floating smoothly along on the peaceful waters of the bay, which gleamed like a silver pathway in the moonlight. The soft air, the gentle rocking of the little boat, and the face of the moon upon which his green eyes were fixed combined to send sleep to his eyelids. Soon he was nodding off in the little boat. A few moments later he was fast asleep. The moon's rays upon his curls made them shine as if they were indeed made of obsidian. Now the village maidens were not the only ones who had noticed Francisco's green eyes and handsome face. A water nymph who dwelt in the depths of the sea had often observed him. In the daytime she was invisible to the eye of humans, and so the lad had never seen her, even though she often spent long hours near him, never taking her eyes off his face. "Here comes the beautiful youth in his little fishing boat," cried the nymph, as she saw the moonlight gleaming upon his shiny curls. "At last my wish has come true. Now at night he'll be able to see me." She hastily arranged her own beautiful hair before a little mirror she carried. Some of the strands of the priceless pearls which decked out her lovely head were a trifle awry. These and the necklaces of rare pearls which hung about her pale throat surrounded her with a gleam of soft light, almost like the light of the moon. As she approached the little boat, she saw that Francisco was fast asleep. She swam in the direction of the lad, and with all possible speed, a wild terror in her eyes. "What madness is this?" she asked as she looked down upon his bowed head. "This frail boat will drift upon the dangerous rocks and be dashed to pieces. I'll take him to my home in my own palace without waking him. Perhaps when he sees how lovely it is, he'll even like me a little bit." Just for a moment she hesitated, thinking how far from home Francisco would be in the palace of the mother of pearl in the depths of the sea. "These rocks are really very dangerous," she said to herself as she gently drew his sleeping form into her arms. The next morning Francisco's empty fishing boat was found by the fishermen. For hours his mother had watched in vain for his return. When at last she heard that the empty boat had been found, she was nearly wild with grief. "He was the best son a mother could ever have," she moaned over again and again. "How can I live without him?" Indeed, as the days and weeks went by, it was increasingly difficult for the poor woman to live. She not only missed her boy's loving smile, but she also missed the fish he caught so skillfully. There was little for the poor woman to eat, if she had any appetite for food. "Why don't you go to the wise man of the sea and tell him your troubles?" asked one of the neighbors. Francisco's mother knew that it was a long and difficult journey to reach the wise man of the sea. She decided, however, it would be worth the effort just to gaze into his wise eyes. He knew so much, Perhaps he would know how to say something to comfort her in her great sorrow and loneliness. She had shrugged her shoulders when her neighbor had spoken of it, but she could not get the idea out of her mind. She knew that she would never rest in peace until she made this journey. Accordingly, she launched Francisco's fishing boat, and thanks to the smooth seas, reached the little rocky island in the midst of the sea where the wise man of the sea lived. His tall form was outlined above the cliff, even as she tied her little boat. He was very tall, far taller than anybody she had ever seen, and his snow-white beard fell to his feet. He was clothed in fish scales which gleamed in the sunlight. "Well, little mother, what can I do for you today?" he asked, as she came up the path to the summit of the rock. The eyes of the wise man of the sea were very kind as well as full of great wisdom. Francisco's mother forgot to be afraid of him, as she expected to be. She told him the story of her lost son. The wise man listened carefully to her words, and then he said, "Good mother, I am glad to tell you that I know where your Francisco is. He is in the power of a water nymph who has carried him away to her castle of mother of pearl in the depths of the sea." Francisco's mother felt tears of joy well up in her eyes. "Is my boy happy there? And is he well?" she asked eagerly. "He is entirely well and happy. The water nymph gave him a potion which has made him forget his past life entirely." "I'm glad you told me that," said the boy's mother. "I was just wondering how my dear lad could be happy while he was causing me so much sorrow. He has always been the best and kindest son with which a mother was ever blessed." The wise man of the sea started to say something, but the woman interrupted as a new thought flew into her mind. "Tell me," she cried, "is there no other way of getting him back? With all your wisdom, can't you think of some way to make him once more remember the mother who loves him and the little home in which we have passed so many happy days together? Do you not know some means of breaking the power which this water nymph has over him?" The wise man looked out across the sea in silence for at least a minute and a half. He thought hard. Francisco's mother watched him with eager eyes. She could hardly wait for his answer. At last these were the words which fell from his lips. "You have shed many tears, good woman, but tears are still to flow if you are to bring back your son." "Oh, must I suffer more?" cried the heartbroken mother. "It seems that I have already lived a lifetime since my dear lad kissed me in the moonlight. I have endured all that I can bear." The wise man smiled gently as he raised his hand. "Listen, my child," he said. "Your tears must be shed upon the bosom of the waters. If perchance one of them should fall upon your son's heart there in the palace of the water nymph in the depths of the sea, the power of her philtre will be broken. I'll shed whole oceans of tears if I can break the power of that water nymph and bring back my Francisco," said his mother. The fact is that she began to shed tears then and there, even before she had thanked the wise man of the sea for what he had told her. Now it happened that Francisco had grown to love the beautiful palace of mother of pearl in the depths of the sea. He never tired of all its beauty. About the palace there were lovely gardens filled with flowers made of precious gems. Each tiny bud of that garden was worth a king's ransom, so rich were the jewels that composed it. The water nymph often gathered her arms full of these rare blossoms and wove them into a garland to crown Francisco's glassy curls. He never had a thought of the old life at home with his mother, so completely had the nymph's concoction done its work. There was always a big fish swimming about in the palace. On its back there was a cushion of sea-green satin embroidered with lovely pearls. "This is your riding horse," said the water nymph to Francisco on the first day he had seen it. "If you should ever get tired of the palace and find life here a bit monotonous, just mount this horse and ride about for a little." The water nymph had shaken out her long mossy tresses so that they covered as much as possible of the fishtail she had instead of feet. She was very sensitive about the fact that she had no feet upon which to wear the pretty little slippers like those of the maidens she had seen so often as they called out the gay greetings to the handsome fisher lad. Francisco had smiled into her eyes. "How absurd," he cried, "to think of such a thing as getting tired of this wonderful place." In fact, the days had slipped by all too fast for the happy youth. Then it suddenly happened one day, while the water nymph was asleep, that he thought of his mother, the little house which had been his home for more than 20 years, and the fishing boat which was his pride and joy. The moonlit night, when he had gaily kissed his mother's cheek and gone away never to return. He did not stop to waken the sleeping nymph. He said no word to the servants of the palace. He thought only of the fish with the cushion of the sea-green satin embroidered with rare pearls. "Quick," he cried to it, "take me home as fast as you can. My mother's heart is breaking. She has shed so many tears for me, I know that by this time she might be entirely blind." In another hour, Francisco was safe at home with his mother's arms around him. She had shed so many tears that her eyes were swollen almost shut, but they were not closed so completely that they could not shine with the great joy once more felt in her heart. "Promise me one thing," she said to him. "Give me your word that you'll never go fishing again. I don't trust that water nymph, even in the daytime." Accordingly, Francisco gave up being a fisherman and became a hunter. To make his spears, he gathered all the young saplings which grew on the hillside, even down to the edge of the water. He had grown still more handsome while he lived in the palace of the mother of pearl in the depths of the sea, and there were twice as many pretty maidens who cast smiling glances in his directions. It was the daughter of the rich man of the village who at last won the heart of Francisco. When he went a-wooing, however, he had no gift to take except for the birds he had killed with his own hand. The rich man laughed at him. These were his words: "When my daughter marries, it shall only be to a youth who can bring her rich gifts." Francisco went away with a sad heart and sat upon the rocks at the edge of the sea, gazing out over the water with eyes so full of tears that they saw nothing. The water nymph was not far away from the shores those days. She was always seeking for a glimpse of the jet-black head which she had so often crowned with flowers. Her joy now at the sight of him was buried by her sorrow when she saw that his heart was full of woe. She at once knew the cause of his grief. The next morning, when Francisco went to get wood to make a new spear, he found a necklace of priceless pearls lying on the shore. It was a gift of the water nymph. But since his heart had been touched by his mother's tears, he had entirely forgotten her. He took the gift to the maid he loved and never thought of the giver. The end. I thought the first story was kind of cute, while still a bit gory. It made me think about the little bean getting bounced around in the goat and the wolf. I felt a bit bad for the goat and the wolf, especially the goat that wasn't even eaten, it was just thrown out in the street. Still, it was cool that the little guy got his pops so rich. And in the second story, I'm glad Francisco was able to wed the person he wanted to. I tweaked the story just a little bit, but left the plot alone. It was all about blonde hair, blue eyes, blonde hair, blue eyes, blonde hair, blue eyes. So I changed some stuff around. And also, the boy's age in the story was 14. I was like, ooh, let's not get into 14-year-olds. Let's make him 20. I can imagine the water nymph's longing for the handsome man, while at the same time, the pull of his mother's love also had an effect on him. My mom had waited for a long time just for me to be home, and now I'm just waiting for my wife to join me in Michigan. Editor's note: I am currently recording this while still in Korea, but this will come out after I've moved back to America. And the podcast shout-out is to the Appalachian Folklore Podcast. I was originally attracted to it because I thought it would be all stories from the mountains, but the host Aaron has all sorts of great lore from that part of the country and brings you into his world with every episode. And if you like it as much as I do, go and give him a listen, a rating, and a review. And the listener shout-out is to the Île-de-France, or Island of France district. It is home to the beautiful city of love, Paris, the Beirut of Western Europe. I had a lovely time there visiting with my brother in 2000. Seeing the Eiffel Tower was fun, and sleeping in a Grand Prix car hostel bed was interesting. But to my listener in Paris, friend of the pod Amy from the Unsighted English Literature podcast says,
Merci et bonne nuit.
And from me, thank you and good night.